Khalid was 7 when he stopped speaking. The car crash that killed his mother took his voice too. His billionaire father tried every specialist on earth, nothing worked. Then an ordinary waitress, Maya, noticed something at the dinner table. She recreated a dish his mother used to make. And for the first time in 3 years, Khalid whispered 3 words. Before we continue, smash subscribe, like this video, and tell us where you're tuning in from. Let's go. Khalid al-Rashid was 7 when he stopped speaking. The car accident that killed his mother stole his voice completely. His father, a billionaire with unlimited resources, tried everything, the finest specialists, experimental therapies, countless interventions. None of them worked. For 3 years, the boy remained locked in silence, his grief too deep for words. Then an ordinary waitress named Maya placed a familiar dish in front of him, and everything changed. But to understand why, we have to go back to a family that seemed blessed, and a tragedy that left only silence in its wake. The al-Rashid family didn't begin in silence. They began in laughter, in the golden heat of Abu Dhabi, where Omar al-Rashid first laid eyes on Amira at a university lecture hall in 1992. He was the son of a fisherman, already building his first business from a rented office barely larger than a closet. She was studying education, dreaming of building schools for children who had nothing. By the time they married, his fortune was growing. By the time their son Khalid was born, Omar had already broken ground on his first international venture. Everything they touched seemed blessed. Amira poured her heart into their home, not with the cold perfection of hired staff, but with her own hands. She cooked every meal herself, refusing the private chefs Omar offered. She knew the precise blend of spices her grandmother had taught her, the way lamb should fall apart at the touch, the exact consistency of rice that made Khalid's eyes light up. For her, food was love made tangible, and little Khalid worshipped her for it. Then came the night that shattered everything. March 17th, 3 years ago, Amira was driving Khalid home from a school event. A delivery truck ran a red light at full speed. The impact crushed the passenger's side, where Amira sat. Emergency crews pulled Khalid from the backseat with only minor physical injuries, but something inside him had broken. His mother was gone, and so was his voice. Omar al-Rashid had built an empire from nothing. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, survived market crashes, outmaneuvered rivals twice his age. But standing in that hospital room, watching his 7-year-old son stare blankly at a wall, he felt utterly powerless. The doctors assured him it was shock. The speech would return. Give it time. Time passed. The silence remained. Omar refused to accept defeat. He flew in the finest child psychologists from London, Geneva, Tokyo. He hired speech pathologists, trauma specialists, behavioral therapists whose waiting lists stretched years, all for his son. They came to his penthouse overlooking Central Park, to his estate in Dubai, to his villa in Monaco. Each expert arrived with credentials and departed with confusion. They diagnosed selective mutism, post-traumatic mutism, complicated grief dissociation. They prescribed therapies, exercises, medications. Nothing worked. Khalid would nod, he would shake his head. He would write notes on a tablet, but words, never a single one. The silence grew heavy around them. Omar would sit with his son in the evenings, watching the boy draw pictures of his mother. Always the same image. Amira in the kitchen, smiling, something simmering on the stove behind her. The drawings were so detailed they hurt to look at. The curve of her smile, the way her hair fell, the precise pattern of the tiles on the wall. Khalid drew nothing else. Omar began taking him to the restaurant at the Peninsula Hotel. It became their ritual. Every Thursday evening, same table by the window. The staff grew accustomed to the silent boy and the tired billionaire. They knew the order by heart. They knew not to ask the child questions. They knew the father would order for both of them, his voice low, his eyes always searching his son's face for something, anything that might break through. And then there was Maya. She wasn't the head chef or the manager. She was simply a waitress who had worked there for 4 years, a Filipina immigrant who had raised 2 children on her own, who knew what it meant to love fiercely and lose profoundly. She noticed things others didn't. She noticed how Khalid's eyes followed the kitchen doors. She noticed how he would lean slightly forward when certain aromas drifted through. She noticed the drawings he sometimes left on the napkin. One Thursday, she stopped at their table and spoke directly to the boy for the first time. Her voice was soft, unhurried. She asked no questions. She simply said, "My grandmother used to cook for me when I was small. Something about the kitchen always felt like home." Khalid looked up at her. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Then it was gone, but Maya kept watching. And 3 months later, on a rainy October evening, she would notice something that none of the expensive specialists had ever seen. Something that would change everything. That rainy October evening, Maya was clearing dishes from table 16 when she noticed something she had missed 100 times before. Khalid wasn't just staring at the kitchen doors. He was tracking a specific person. One of the line cooks, an older Moroccan woman named Fatia, was moving through her evening routine, and Khalid's eyes followed every motion. Maya froze. She watched the boy watch the cook, and then she understood. She had been serving the Al-Rashids for 3 months by then, enough time to learn the father's habits, his quiet grief, his tendency to speak in fragments about his late wife. Omar al-Rashid never told stories outright. He let details slip like water through fingers. How Amira used to hum while she cooked. How she crushed cardamom pods with the flat of a knife instead of a grinder. How she always added a pinch of sugar to her lamb marinade, a secret her grandmother had taught her. He mentioned these things casually, almost unconsciously, and Maya collected them like evidence. She was a mother herself. She knew that the smallest details held the deepest love. Maya approached Omar's table that night with an unusual request. She asked if Amira had a particular dish she always made for Khalid, something the boy especially loved. Omar looked at her, surprised by the question. He hesitated. Then he described it: a lamb stew with prunes and almonds, slow cooked for hours, the meat falling apart, the sauce slightly sweet, served over saffron rice with toasted pine nuts on top. It was a dish from Amira's grandmother, brought over from the Levant generations ago. Khalid would eat 3 servings when his mother made it, always asking for more. The next Thursday, Maya came to work 3 hours early. She didn't tell Omar, she didn't ask permission. She simply walked into the kitchen, found Fatia, and spoke to her in Arabic. The Moroccan cook listened carefully as Maya recited the recipe, describing every detail Omar had mentioned, every technique Amira had used. The cardamom crushed with a knife, the pinch of sugar, the pine nuts toasted in butter until they turned gold. Fatia nodded slowly. She had been making hotel-standard lamb stew for years. This was different. This was someone's memory. That evening, when Omar and Khalid arrived at their usual table, the boy was more withdrawn than usual. He had spent the day with a new speech therapist, the 7th specialist in 3 years, and the session had left him exhausted and vacant. He stared at the tablecloth as his father ordered the same dishes they always ordered. But Maya had already spoken to the pastry chef. She had already arranged everything. When the plate arrived, it was not on the menu. Omar frowned, ready to send it back. Then he saw it. The lamb, arranged exactly as Amira used to serve it, the stew on one side of the plate, the saffron rice on the other, the pine nuts scattered in a perfect arc, the way she always insisted on presenting it. He looked up at Maya, confused, almost angry. She met his eyes and said nothing. Khalid had not looked up from the tablecloth all evening, but when the aroma reached him, something shifted. His head lifted. His nose caught the scent. His eyes, dull and distant moments before, snapped into focus. He stared at the plate as if seeing a ghost. Omar held his breath. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Khalid reached for the spoon with a trembling hand. He brought a small bite to his mouth. He chewed, and then his shoulders began to shake, not from fear, from recognition. He looked at his father, and for the first time in 3 years, his mouth formed words. His voice was barely a whisper, cracked from disuse but unmistakably clear. "Mama used to do that." Omar al-Rashid did not move. He did not breathe. He sat perfectly still as tears spilled down his face, dripping onto the white tablecloth. His son, the boy locked in silence for over 1,000 days, had just spoken. The words were more precious than any business deal, any fortune, any title the world had ever given him. Maya stood back, her own eyes wet, her hands clasped. She had not been trained in trauma therapy. She had no medical degree, no certification in child psychology. She was a waitress who had paid attention. She understood that grief did not respond to expertise. It responded to connection, to memory, to the 1,000 small things that made a lost person real again. The dining room went quiet. Other guests turned to watch. sensing that something profound had occurred. A waiter named Carlos, who had served the Al-Rashids for 2 years, later told reporters he had never seen the father so destroyed and so restored in the same moment. Omar reached across the table and took his son's hand. He did not push for more words. He did not ask questions. He simply held on, as if afraid the moment would vanish if he moved too quickly. Khalid looked at his hand in his father's grip, and then, very quietly, he said another sentence. She made it every Thursday, 2 sentences, 6 words total. After 3 years of complete silence, the dam had cracked. What happened next at the Peninsula Hotel that night, and the astonishing offer Omar al-Rashid would make to a waitress he barely knew, would spark a debate that divided child psychologists, captivated the media, and ultimately raised a question that no one could answer. If a grieving child's voice could be unlocked by a stranger's simple act of kindness, what did all the expensive treatments miss? The question echoed far beyond the quiet dining room of the Peninsula Hotel. Within 48 hours, the story had leaked. A guest at a nearby table had recorded the moment on a phone, the boy's whisper, the father's tears, the waitress standing silently nearby. The clip went viral before Omar al-Rashid had even decided how to tell the rest of his family. By Monday morning, the video had 12 million views. Every major news network was calling. And the world wanted to know who was the waitress who had done what the finest specialists could not. Maya de la Cruz was not looking for fame. She had come to the United States 14 years earlier, leaving behind a small fishing village in the Philippines, carrying a nursing degree that American hospitals refused to recognize. She worked double shifts, sent money to her 2 daughters back home, and saved every spare dollar. Her husband had left years ago. Her mother had died of cancer while Maya was stuck in immigration limbo, unable to return for the funeral. She understood grief. She understood the weight of words left unspoken. When the reporters found her apartment in Queens, they expected something dramatic. Instead, they found a modest 1-bedroom with a small altar in the corner, candles burning beside photographs of her mother and a child, a daughter she had lost to dengue fever before coming to America. That daughter would have been Khalid's age. Maya had never spoken about it at work. She had never asked for sympathy. But when she looked at the silent boy at her table, she had seen her own reflection, frozen in a grief that had no name. Omar al-Rashid spent 3 days trying to process what had happened. He asked his security team to find everything about Maya. The report shocked him. She was not just a waitress with good intuition. She had been a pediatric nurse in the Philippines before immigrating. She had worked with children who had suffered trauma, children who had stopped speaking after typhoons, after losing parents, after witnessing things no child should see. The skills she had used were not random. They were deeply trained. And yet, when American credentials were denied, she had taken a job serving food, and still, she had not forgotten what she knew. Omar sat in his penthouse office, staring at the report when his phone rang. It was the lead specialist from the London Trauma Center, the one who had charged $200,000 for a 3-month consultation that had produced nothing. The man wanted to offer a statement for the media, something about how the breakthrough was a natural extension of the groundwork his team had laid. Omar hung up without saying a word. The medical community was divided. Some child psychologists called it a 1-in-a-million sensory trigger, a lucky coincidence that would be impossible to replicate. Others argued it exposed a fundamental flaw in how the industry treated childhood trauma, too much focus on clinical intervention, not enough on creating emotional safety through familiar, loving routines. The debate spilled onto morning shows and podcasts. Suddenly, Maya de la Cruz was being discussed in medical journals, the waitress who had done their job for free. But here is where the story takes a turn that nobody expected. Omar invited Maya to his home, intending to offer her a reward. He had a check prepared, $500,000. She refused it. Instead, she asked for something else, access to the family's kitchen and permission to cook with Khalid every Thursday, the way Amira used to. She believed that if one meal could unlock 6 words, a ritual could restore the rest of his voice. Omar, desperate and hopeful, agreed. For the next 3 months, Maya arrived at the Al-Rashid penthouse every Thursday afternoon. She brought no textbooks, no flashcards, no therapy exercises. She brought groceries. She tied an apron around Khalid's small waist. She let him measure spices, stir sauces, knead dough. And as they cooked, she talked, not about feelings or trauma or the accident. She talked about her own grandmother, about the way certain smells could carry you back to a person you had lost. She told him that his mother was in his hands, in the way he crushed cardamom, in the way he salted the meat. And slowly, Khalid began to talk back. First came fragments, recipe instructions, questions about ingredients, then longer sentences, observations about school, memories of his mother that had been locked away. By the end of the second month, he told Maya the thing he had told no therapist, that he had not spoken because he was afraid if he did, he would forget his mother's voice. Silence had been his only way of keeping her present. When he whispered, "Mama used to do that," he had not only spoken, he had surrendered a secret he had guarded for 3 years. Omar watched from the doorway, hiding his own tears, as his son relearned language through the memory of love. He realized that the 7 specialists had all been focused on getting Khalid to speak. Maya alone had understood that he first needed to feel safe enough to let go of silence. And that realization would soon become a mission neither of them could have predicted. But as the boy's voice returned, an unexpected crisis was brewing. The extended Al-Rashid family, powerful relatives from Abu Dhabi who controlled shares in the family empire, had watched the viral videos with growing alarm. They began to whisper that Omar had lost control, that a billionaire reduced to tears in a hotel restaurant, entrusting his heir to a foreign waitress, was a liability. And when they learned that Omar planned to establish a foundation in Amira's name, one that would put Maya in charge of a global initiative to train caregivers in trauma-informed cooking therapy, the whispers turned into a confrontation that would threaten everything. The confrontation came on a Thursday morning, just as Maya was teaching Khalid how to lay a phyllo dough. Omar received the summons by encrypted message while standing in his own kitchen. His uncle, Tariq al-Rashid, the family patriarch who had built the oil empire's Gulf operations, demanded an emergency video conference with all board members. The message was blunt. "We have concerns about the direction of the family and the company. You will address us in 1 hour." Omar knew what this was. In their world, sentimentality was weakness. Public tears were worse. A billionaire who wept openly in a restaurant and then handed the keys to his son's recovery to a Filipina waitress with no formal credentials. That was not just a personal failing. It was a reputational threat to a dynasty worth billions. The Al-Rashid brand had been built on strength, control, and an unshakable image of superiority. Omar had just shattered all 3. He walked into his study, closed the door, and opened the video link. On the screen were 12 faces, uncles, cousins, board members, their faces etched with disapproval. Tariq spoke first, his tone cold. "Omar, the footage from the hotel has been seen across the world. You are the head of this family and you wept like a child. You have allowed a woman with no medical license, no university degree that we recognize, to become your son's primary caregiver. And now we hear you intend to give her a foundation. This cannot continue." Omar listened without interruption. Then he did something none of them expected. He called Khalid into the room. The boy walked in, still wearing his apron dusted with flour. Omar placed the tablet in front of his son. "Tell them what you told me," he said softly. Khalid looked into the camera. There was silence for a moment. Then, in a voice that was still fragile but unmistakably clear, he said, "I stopped talking because I thought if I didn't, Mama would stay. But that wasn't true. She's gone, but Maya showed me she's still in the food. She's in my hands when I cook. And I can talk now. I can talk because I'm not afraid to remember." The 12 faces on the screen stared. The silence stretched. Khalid then added, "If you take Maya away, you take my voice again. Is that what you want?" Tariq's expression flickered. The other relatives shifted uncomfortably. Omar took back the tablet. "You've questioned my judgment. You've questioned my strength. But I am not building a foundation to repair my image. I am building it because I watched my son speak for the first time in 3 years after one woman paid attention when the world's best doctors did not. If that makes me weak, then I will wear that weakness with pride. And if you want to call a vote to remove me, do it now." The board members looked at each other. Tariq cleared his throat. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the younger cousins, a woman named Fatima who had built the family's charitable arm, said quietly, I've seen the footage, I've read the reports. This is not weakness. This is the strongest thing I've ever seen a father do. She turned to the others. I will not vote against him. One by one, the opposition crumbled. Tariq finally conceded, though his face remained tight. The foundation, he said, must have proper governance. We will appoint a medical advisory board. But if this works, it will bear the Al-Rashid name, and that name will not be associated with failure. It was not a warm endorsement, but it was enough. Omar closed the call, exhaled, and looked at his son. Khalid had already returned to the kitchen to finish his filo. He was humming. The sound was faint, almost unconscious, but it was the first time Omar had heard his son make music since before the accident. The Amira Al-Rashid Foundation launched 6 months later. Maya de la Cruz was named Chief Program Officer, with a salary that made her weep when she first saw the number, enough to bring her daughters from the Philippines, enough to secure their futures. The foundation's mission was simple but radical: train thousands of caregivers, cooks, nurses, and parents in what Maya called kinship through cuisine, a method that used food preparation and family recipes to reconnect traumatized children to lost loved ones, and through that connection, to their own voices. The medical establishment was skeptical at first. Then the results came in. In the pilot program, 47 children who had been diagnosed with trauma-induced mutism went through the Foundation's 12-week kitchen therapy protocol. 31 of them spoke again, not a few words, sentences, conversations, laughter. The success rate was more than double the best existing treatments. When the data was published in a major pediatric journal, the same specialists who had dismissed Maya now invited her to speak at conferences. She accepted every invitation, always beginning her talks the same way. I'm not a doctor, I'm a waitress who paid attention. Khalid, now 11, began attending school regularly for the first time. He still cooked every Thursday, the ritual had become sacred. But now he spoke freely, telling jokes, asking questions, making friends. The drawings of his mother no longer consumed him. He had found a new way to carry her with him, one that did not silence him but gave him a voice. And then came the final surprise, the detail that even Omar did not see coming. A year after the foundation launched, Maya received a letter from a man she did not know. He was a trauma researcher in Lebanon who had been following her work. He had run a study on the specific neural pathways activated by olfactory and gustatory memory, smell, and taste. He discovered that these senses bypass the brain's typical trauma-blocking mechanisms, accessing memory centers directly through the limbic system. In other words, the reason Maya's approach worked was not magic or luck. It was hard science, a pathway that had been hiding in plain sight. The researcher wanted to collaborate. The foundation now had a neuroscientific basis for everything it did. Maya sat in her new office in the Al-Rashid building, the letter in her hands, and thought of her grandmother, who used to say that the kitchen was the heart's best healer. Science had finally caught up to that ancient wisdom, but the real ending came on a Thursday evening, exactly 2 years after the night at the Peninsula Hotel. Maya and Khalid were making Amira's lamb stew, as they always did. Khalid was now the one crushing the cardamom with the flat of a knife, exactly as his mother had. He turned to Maya and said, I think she would be proud, not just of me, of all of us. Maya nodded, and then Khalid added something that made her stop stirring. I want to be a chef when I grow up, so I can help other kids the way you helped me. In that moment, a circle completed itself. From a mother's love poured into a dish, to a son's silence, to a stranger's attention, to a foundation, to a child's dream of paying it forward. The billionaire's son had found his voice again, and a waitress who never forgot what it meant to lose someone had helped thousands of other children find theirs. This story could have ended very differently. A billionaire dies at a gala. A boy remains silent forever. A waitress stays invisible. Instead, a chain reaction of attention and courage rewrote every outcome. It rewrote the science too. That researcher in Lebanon discovered that the olfactory bulb, the part of the brain that processes smell, sits just millimeters from the amygdala and hippocampus, the seats of emotion and memory. When we inhale a familiar scent, we bypass the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, and travel straight to the limbic system, where trauma lives. Maya's kitchen therapy was not just cultural tradition, It was neurobiological engineering, refined by thousands of years of grandmothers who understood intuitively what laboratories are only now proving. The Amira Al-Rashid Foundation now operates in 23 countries. Its trainers are not always doctors. Many are cooks, bakers, mothers who lost children and found purpose in feeding others. They teach not with PowerPoints, but with ladles and spice grinders and the patience to sit beside a silent child until the silence softens. Over 500 formerly mute children have spoken again, not cured, not fixed, but reconnected. Each one a testament that grief, when met with presence rather than pressure, can release its grip. But here is the lingering question, the one that should keep you up tonight. How many Khalids are still out there, locked in silence, surrounded by people who have all the money in the world but none of the attention? How many institutions are still treating trauma as a checklist of symptoms instead of an invitation to listen? The most expensive care in history could not break through to a 7-year-old boy. A waitress who simply paid attention did it with a plate of lamb and a memory of her own grandmother. If this story has stayed with you, let it do more than that. Subscribe to this channel and tap the bell so you never miss investigations into the extraordinary moments that change everything. Like this video to help the algorithm, share it with someone who might need to see that hope can come from the most unexpected hands. Comment below, what familiar smell instantly takes you back to someone you loved? We read every single one. And if you know a child who needs this kind of hope, share this video with their family. You might be the connection that changes everything. Because in the end, all the specialists and all the billions could not buy what was freely offered: presence. A woman who saw a silent boy and did not try to fix him, only to nourish him. And in doing so, she reminded the world that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that simply shows up.